To help you start putting your library together, I've created a story resource guide. It's not meant to be all-inclusive, it's just a start and gives you some possibilities. You can get a free copy of it on our Well-Educated Heart page, right there on the upper, you'll see it right there in the left-hand column. And by the way, the 12-month rotating schedule is found in this guide. Let me show you how it's organized. In the right-hand column, I've listed movies, CDs, and audios. There are some great old Hollywood movies out there that can deepen the impression of stories from history. Many were filmed on location. Yes, some are cheesy. You can pick and choose. IMDb.com is a great resource to help you determine which movies are appropriate for the ages of your family. I've found dozens of these movies on VHS at library sales for $1 each. You can even pick up cheap VHS players at thrift stores or eBay. And I put the movies right with the other books for the month on my bookshelves. Or a lot of these movies, most of them are available for streaming. Now down at the bottom, you'll see Jim Weiss. He's a masterful storyteller who I highly recommend. Many public libraries carry his CDs, or you can order them online. The middle column has tried and true favorites that may be out of print, but you should be able to find copies of. You'll notice most of the titles are pre-1960. That's because the 60s is when we threw out all the rules of right and wrong. I'm not saying you shouldn't read newer books. It will just be easier to discern the trash from the treasure if you start with those that have proven themselves to be wholesome and worthwhile. In the American sections, I list books from the childhoods of famous American series from the 40s and 50s, which is a very popular series. The Landmark series are also wonderful books from the 50s and 60s, and they bring history to life. I'd say they're for ages 10 and older. If you can get a hold of my book house, the 1971 version is the one I drew from. This is a wonderful collection of stories that I've referenced here. And the Junior Classics is also a great set of books you should be able to find at used book sales. The left-hand column is our Forgotten Classics Family Library. This is a free online library available for your use, filled with amazing books that are pure gold and have only become available to us through the digitizing efforts of the last 5 to 10 years. They were all written before 1923, which places them in the public domain, meaning there are no copyright issues. This was truly a golden age of children's literature when stories were used to teach every subject. These educators taught that if you can find the right story, you can create an interest in any subject. Modern books lean toward informing and entertaining. These older books are all about inspiring and warming. I've spent years going through thousands of books, selecting and organizing them into a family library for others to use. I can't even begin to describe the measure of joy that has come into my life from spending so much time with them. I hope they'll do the same for you. The language may take a little getting used to, but as you read them aloud, it will become familiar, and the vocabularies of your children are going to grow leaps and bounds. You'll notice a little alphabet soup going on, for example, S3. Let me introduce you to the library so it will make sense. The Forgotten Classics Library is found on our welleducatedheart.com page. You'll see 6 images here in the center. Picture each of these as leading you into 6 different library rooms. If you want books about American history, go into the Freedom Series room. If you're looking for world history, go into the World History room. Nature, Art, and Music has books on, make a guess, Nature, Art, and Music. Great Lives has biographies, and the Story Hour series has the under age 8 crowd in mind. And Resources is kind of a catch-all room for books and resources that don't fit in the other rooms. You'll find a lot of classic literature there. So let's enter the Story Hour room, which the S directs you to. Inside the room, you'll notice 12 book covers that are numbered. These are collections of stories that we publish that are available for purchase, but you don't have to buy anything to access the rest of the library. I'm using them to organize the library so you can find what you're looking for. Let me just take a moment to tell you a little bit more about them. Have you ever tried to start a campfire by dropping a log in the pit and trying to light a match to it? It didn't go so well, did it? You need kindling to get the fire burning, and when the flame is strong enough, then you can put the log on and it will sustain itself. These books are designed to be the kindling. They provide a grab and read option. I looked for high interest stories from a variety of books so that you could start to sample the different writers. I don't expect most kids to pick them up on their own because they're 350 to 400 pages each and there are no pictures inside because they're intended as read-alouds. There are 12 books in each library room or each series. They can be bought individually as sets, or you can subscribe to one or however many books a month you want us to send you if you want to build your library over time. They're $12.95 a book, and we can customize the order that we send the books to you. But let's go back to S3. The S took you into the Story Hour room, and the number 3 directs you to the number 3 online library. Picture this as a bookshelf in the library room. In this case, Imaginative Stories is a collection of fairy tales from around the world. All the books on that bookshelf will be fairy tales. Click on the online library, and it will lead you to a list of books that you can now access online for free. In this case, I've organized these fairy tales by country. Let's take a look at the fairy tales from Holland. It's going to open up in Internet Archive. You can enlarge the book by clicking on the top icon to the right. Now you can just read the book just like a book on the screen. If the font is too small, you can choose the single page option in the icon below, and then you can enlarge it to whatever size works for you. An iPad makes this online library extremely convenient. You'll also notice a PDF option that makes it possible for you to print the book out, illustrations and all, which you can 3-hole punch and put in a notebook. With our laser printer and printing double-sided, I rarely spend more than $5 to print out a book. Most are only $2 or $3, and this gives you a cost-effective way to start building your library with quality books. There are over 2,000 books in this family library, and I'm adding more to it all the time. I've really been enjoying this 12-month rotation because I like to keep my learning moving. I love variety. I'm a butterfly learner. I flit from flower to flower, tasting here and there, lingering longer at some and then stopping to drink deeply from others. Over time, as my experience and understanding and interest deepen, I'll remember something I tasted and go back and spend more time there. A well-stocked home library allows for butterfly learning. Organizing the books by month keeps the reading from becoming desultory. Older children are perfectly capable of self-selecting those books they're ready for and passing on those they're not. Just because they don't read one at age 7 doesn't mean they won't love it at age 11. This is my books book. This is where I keep track of all the books that I'm reading. I've got mine divided out by month, and I placed each month's story resource guide in its corresponding month. There are some reading logs like this that you can print out from the image shelf in the resource room in our Forgotten Classics library. I have one page for the Freedom Series to keep track of the American history books and one for world history in each month. If I don't complete the whole book, I make note of what pages I read in the right-hand column. If I read a book online, I make a note of which online library room I found the book in underneath the number in the left-hand column. At the back of the notebook are reading logs for nature and science reading, which, as mentioned, is a topic for another day's discussion, and there's also a place for miscellaneous books that don't fit in the other categories. Whether you choose a 4-year plan or 12-month plan, that establishes a rhythm for your learning so that it's not all over the place. Now I want to share some ideas for the kinds of stories and activities that are best suited for each of the age levels. A 3-year-old isn't going to be interested in or be able to grasp the story of a moral hero. How do you know what level they're at? They'll let you know. When they say, "That's so boring," you'll know it's not a right fit yet. First stories should be familiar stories, meaning they connect to something familiar in a child's life. For little children, especially under the age of 4, familiar means family. They love stories that have to do with babies and little children and mommies and daddies, grandmas and grandpas. Be sure and include personal family stories, especially when daddies and grandmas were little boys and girls. These are important for giving them a sense of belonging. If you want to start chapter books, look for books with strong family values, such as Little House in the Big Woods. They also love stories about animals and nature. Thornton Burgess and Clara Dillingham Pierce are perfect reads for this age, and you'll find those books in the Story Hour library. Little children are also naturally drawn to stories of Jesus. If you want to connect a child's heart to him, I'd avoid cartoon characters at this age and unfold the story simply and by heart. These kinds of stories will give them emotional and spiritual security. Around age 4 or 5, they're entering the imaginative years, and you can transition with stories that are part real and part fantasy, such as Raggedy Ann and Peter Rabbit, which are also found online. The imaginative years are some of the most important years of their lives. This is the age for stories of things they've never seen with their eyes, so that their minds have to create their own images. Imagination. Neglect these stories, and there will be less power to empathize, to dream, or to create, which all depend on the ability to visualize. The years from around age 4 to around 8 are when children are primed for imaginative stories such as fairy tales and mythology. This can be a first thread of stories through the 12-month rotation schedule. In month 1, read tales from India like Kipling's Just So stories, and from Scandinavia, Hans Christian Andersen fairy tales. Month 4, introduce simple Greek myths, and so forth. Not only will their imagination grow, moral truths will be delivered in a way their hearts will understand. When you read these stories aloud, it doesn't mean you have to exclude older family members. I never get tired of fairy tales. Look for stories of children in classic literature like A Little Princess and A Secret Garden, as well as start to introduce them to the great artists, scientists, and musicians of history by telling them stories of their childhoods. Tell them about Beethoven when he was a little boy in month 10 when you study Germany, and Millet when he was little in month 5, France. I've provided stories of childhoods for you. You'll find lots of childhood stories also in the Childhood of Great Americans series. This is a good age to start a Literature Gems notebook. The rotating schedule provides the plan. The notebooks now create and help you to focus on purpose and meaning. When I read, I'm always looking for the gems, the little pearls of wisdom that teach me how to live a happy life. I organized my Literature Gems notebook alphabetically by title. This is a page my daughter made for her book after she read The Frog Prince with her daughters. The gem was, "A promise is a promise." After she made it, 5-year-old Emma said, "I want to make a page like that." And 10-year-old Kaylee said, "I want to make a page like that." And they did. Here are some sample pages from my Literature Gems book. After I write the title on the top and the author, I write when the book was written and then when and where the story of the book takes place, along with a very brief synopsis of the story. I didn't do that on Pollyanna, but it's on the others. I shrunk these illustrations down from the Pollyanna book, and they give me an instant reminder of the story. For a young child, that may be enough for a Literature Gems page. From time to time, you can sit down and flip through the pages of their notebook and use the pictures as prompts to talk about and remember what the story was about. When I read a book, I always keep small Post-it tabs with me so I can mark the gems along the way. Then when I'm all done, I go back and decide if it's something that means enough to me that I want to copy it in my gem book or not. Sometimes I just put enough of the passage to remind me and a page number where I can find it again. My Literature Gems book then becomes a scrapbook of wisdom. As you share your book with your children, they'll start hunting for their own treasures of wisdom for their own books. You don't have to create You don't have to create a page for every book or story you read, just the ones where you found something that you want to hold on to. Here's a page from A Little Princess. This time I shrunk color illustrations down. I can't always find illustrations, so I just add splashes of color here or there, like this page from A Lantern in Her Hand. One important lesson we want to impress on our children's hearts is that everyone in the world doesn't think just like they do. Each person sees the world differently. We want to develop understanding hearts that respect those differences. So this is a good age to introduce stories of children from different cultures. This is the age I would begin an Around the World notebook. This is my notebook. I'm pure Swedish, so I put a Scandinavian family on the front of mine. I've created divider tabs for each country and arranged them alphabetically. What will go in this notebook are maps, traditions, holidays, recipes, religious practices, costumes, landmarks, crafts, and so forth. Maybe in 1 year's rotation, you can learn a game from each of the countries in the rotation. Another year, you can make a special craft from each country. Take a picture of it and put it in the notebook. When they're little, maybe your children will enjoy looking for international paper dolls online throughout the year and putting those in their notebook. You can see how the notebook can grow over the years. Around age 8, children enter the heroic years. The stories to this point have been preparatory. As they now start to learn the stories of history, they will have so much the advantage if they're able to picture the events and recreate them in their own minds so they become real. Children at this age are hungry for stories of action heroes as opposed to moral heroes. So take one of the year's rotations to introduce them to simple stories of the great epic and legendary heroes of the world, like Odysseus of Greece, Roland of France, King Arthur, and Robin Hood of England, Siegfried of Germany. These figures are part fiction and part fact, and so they provide a nice bridge from fantasy to reality. Now is the age I'd start introducing the stories of American history, which leads to the question, why do we study history? For some, it's a subject to cross off the list. Who cares what someone did 4,000 years ago, right? Wrong. While the way we dress and the food we eat and the houses we live in have changed over the years, there's one thing that hasn't changed: human nature, which means that no matter when someone lived, they have something useful to teach my heart. I don't study history to learn about them. I study history for what they can teach me and about living life. There is nothing more fascinating to the human heart than to see life played out. Why else are there so many tabloids at the checkout counter? By taking a look at their lives, I start visualizing and making choices of the person I want to be. I start seeing life played out with all its possibilities. I take note of warnings and lessons. They teach me how to overcome every possible obstacle and difficulty. They help me to understand the motives of other people around me and how to get along with others. From history, I learn the rules by which civilizations prosper, the laws that promote the most happiness, and what makes societies crumble and fail. And I'm always looking for God's fingerprints, which I find everywhere. Stories have the power to bring great men and women to life who become personal friends. By focusing on stories of people, your children can be surrounded by the diamond souls of history who will teach and mentor them and who will lift them up to where they can see life from higher places. Some will teach them through visual arts, others through music, and others through literature. By helping them understand those languages, they'll find even more treasures of wisdom that will bring them great joy. As I already mentioned, all the stories up to this point are preparatory for this vital time of a young person's life when heroes will make a deeper impression now than at perhaps any other time in their lives. Earlier stories have helped develop a sense of right and wrong. They've increased the power to create strong visual images which will help in these years given to study lives. Young people aren't ready to make serious analyses of history. That has to come later when they have the maturity and the judgment to do so. Every day we see the tragedy of people who are attempting to live their lives from a shallow puddle of stories. This is the time to make sure the story reservoirs of your children are broad and deep. Then no matter what they face, they'll have a story to show them the way through. To help me hold on to what I'm learning, I created my Story of the World notebook. Remember, to avoid desultory learning, we need a plan and a purpose and a way to connect everything. The rotating schedule provides the plan and the connections. These notebooks now provide the purpose and meaning for the learning, which is learning the art of learning well, of living well. 2 kinds of pages go in my Story of the World notebook: people and events. Because I'm going to be weaving threads of stories from many resources over the years, I create landing pages to gather the things I'm learning. Here are some samples. Here's De Soto and Marie Antoinette. To create a landing page, I write the name of the person at the top. You can see that I like color. Then I get on Wikipedia, and I use that as my source for a birth year and death year, where that person was born, and I make a note if they're primarily associated with a country that's different from their birth country. If I don't already know, Wikipedia will usually tell me in the first paragraph what that person is most noted for, and I write that beneath the name. Then I place the page in the notebook chronologically by birth year or event year. I even create landing pages for each of my ancestors. Historical events are even more meaningful knowing that a family member may have taken part. This is an ongoing activity. Sometimes I'll create a page because I find a really good quote and I want to hold on to it. Other times I create a landing page from a picture. I try and find as many pictures as I can because pictures give instant recall. I find pictures in old textbooks I cut up and I put in a check file case like this until I'm ready to put them on a page. You can see that I've organized it by month. I also find pictures from the fine art I showed you a few minutes ago, which is all organized by month and nation. I'm in the process of shrinking illustrations from the old books that I'll make available to you as well, and that's where I got these pictures for my Christopher Columbus page. So what goes on these pages? I only include a fact if it really means something to me. Most facts I can find instantly online, so I don't need to take up page space. What I'm looking for are the gems again, more pearls of wisdom. The older children's books are filled with them. I also note stories I especially liked and where I read them. I use a shorthand system to reference the books they've come from. For instance, if you can see it, it says F1, and then there's a 1 in parentheses and dash 118, which is going to refer back to my reading log. I'll find this particular book on the F1 page in my reading log. It's book number 1, that's the number in the parentheses, and the number after the dash is what page that quote is found on. That way I don't have to write out all the titles and authors over and over again. I keep a running list of books where I've read about that person in the right-hand column of the page. Sometimes a question will come up from my reading and I'll jot it down. Like the Literature Gems notebook, children's books may only have pictures to begin with and maybe a few references to stories, but they'll be watching what you put in yours. I do the same thing to create event pages, and for really significant events, like the landing of the Mayflower, I put them on a divider tab. Here's an event page for the Spirit of 76. Sometimes, if it's not too long, I'll copy out documents like the Mayflower Compact or the Gettysburg Address and include it. I'm sure you can see this is the beginning of research skills, of gathering materials from many sources. What it's really doing, though, is impressing a flow of events and linking people and times together. Each time a page is added, I get a quick review of what else was going on in the world at that time, and who was living at the same time. As the notebook fills up, just take half out and create a new notebook. Again, this can be a lifetime project. At this age, your children's reading skills will likely allow them to work much more independently. Let them start choosing the threads that they may want to weave through the different countries in that year's rotations, and then you choose the threads you want to work on. Maybe one year they'll want to focus on historical fiction or biographies. Another year, maybe they'll want to follow the story of art history and artists, one country at a time. Maybe a year or two later, they'll decide to focus on one artist from each country that caught their interest earlier and study their lives and works in greater depth. They can do the same for music history and musicians, writers and literature, scientists and scientific discoveries, inventors. Maybe one year's thread will be on architecture and landmarks, or the study of religious beliefs. Let one of the threads in the beginning involve creating maps that will go in the Around the World notebooks and that they can continually refer to and add to. One year you can study languages and take an introductory look at each one and learn a few words. Threads can be repeated each time going into greater depth. Keep in mind there's no problem running multiple threads in a single year. By the time a child is 11 or 12, I'd have them read the story of each nation, one at a time, beginning to modern times, so they start to see where the people they've been learning about fall into place. They'll gain perspective. For instance, first they'll read the story of England's fight against Scotland from England's point of view. Then by reading Scotland's struggle with England from Scotland's point of view. By reading a quick sweep of each nation's story, the patterns and lessons will begin to emerge, and they'll start being able to apply those to our modern world. By the time they're 16 or 17, they're ready for more scholarly works, like Durant's Story of Civilization, or there's some really great choices in the Forgotten Classics library, like the Story of the Nation series or Ava March Tappan series. They'll now be ready to read the actual classics they were introduced to earlier, like Don Quixote or Shakespeare, as well as the actual writers of the great thinkers and philosophers who will by now be old friends to them: Milton, Augustine, Plato, Tolstoy. And now there's one more book to add. This is probably the most important one of all because it's where all the gold is spun. It's the story of my life. What good is learning all these things if they're never applied to make our own lives joyful and satisfying? You'll find as you continually treasure up these truths and examples into your heart, they'll come floating back to your mind as you face challenges and decisions in your own life. This is the place to record what and who inspired you and how you applied it. For instance, one time I was really discouraged after I gave a talk, and I came home determined I would never accept another speaking engagement again. As I threw my pity party, the story of Verdi floated to mind. He too had arrived at a point when he said he'd never write another opera again. He reminded me the darkest time of night is just before the dawn. He gave me the courage to try again, and I did. I wrote the experience down. Share your story of your life often with your children, and they will start their own when they're ready. This is not the end of their learning. It's only the beginning, and as the Spirit guides them and enlightens their understanding, they'll be full of wisdom and goodness and be prepared to take on their personal mission and purpose in life. Where are the writing lessons, you may ask? Where is the college prep? It's everywhere. Instead of reading a dozen or more assigned books, your children are likely to have read hundreds. That's how Jefferson and Scott, Stowe and Stevenson and Tolstoy learned. And as your children read, they will have pondered and asked their own questions. Their minds will be filled with ideas, and their hearts will be full of desire. The secret of their success will not be in how many things they know about, but how many things they care about, and they'll care about a lot of things. They will have picked up style and polish from the writings of the greatest writers ever as they copy their words. Their vocabulary will be off the charts. Today, we think we can create writers by focusing on the mechanics of writing. 100 years ago, they taught, "If thou wouldst write, thou must first live." John Milton, who gave us Paradise Lost, rejected the practice of school compositions, calling it forcing the empty wits of children to compose themes, verses, and orations, which are the acts of ripest judgment and the final work of a head filled by long reading and observing. The biggest obstacle to writing is having nothing to say. As your children observe, capture, and reflect their thoughts in their journal, they are learning to write the same way the world's greatest writers did. Because they will have studied lives of scientists, poets, and businessmen, their hearts will already understand the price they'll need to pay for serious study and will be willing to do so. If you're still with me, I know this has been a long presentation. My heart is so full of ideas, it's hard to pick and choose, and I wanted to give you enough to catch the vision. But still, I've only been able to touch on these things. At the beginning, I mentioned I would show you where you can learn more. If you go to the Well-Educated Heart page, in the left-hand column is a series of little talks that will deepen your understanding of the things I've talked about. It's free. Bring me along while you're doing the dishes or folding the laundry. I know you're busy. And do sign up for the free story resource guide that you'll see just above the audio course. Make sure it doesn't go into your spam folder. I also invite you to join our community of families in our Well-Educated Heart Facebook group. This is what the page looks like. Bring your questions, your concerns, and your successes and ideas for reaching and inspiring the hearts of children there. This is where I'll share new resources for you to use. I've shown you the library. Here you'll find librarians to help you find just the right book for just the right time. We're following the 12-month rotation schedule there, but you can step in anytime. It doesn't matter. You'll find a group who is studying just the things you are, and it will give you a common ground for discussion. I know I'm a dreamer, but I hope you're a dreamer too. I dream of a better world. Changing it one heart at a time is the only way to bring it about. And so I'll end with this thought. A certain man had a friend who was a beekeeper. Upon visiting him one day, he found his friend distraught. "I'm ruined," he cried. "All my honey is bitter." The man considered thoughtfully for a moment and then suggested they get up early in the morning and try to follow the swarm of bees to see what they were feeding on, which they did. They found them at an old abandoned bottling factory where out back there were barrels of icky, gooey, rotting syrups from which the bees were filling their little pollen sacs and flying back to the hives. Change what your bees are feeding on, and you'll change the quality of your honey, the man said. As we pay attention to the quality of stories, images, and music our children are feeding on, we will not only change the quality of their lives, we'll change the quality of the world. That's my hope and vision, and the vision and hope of Libraries of Hope. Thank you so much for being here.